We now come to the urgent question to ask on the impact of aviation. I understand that it will be Minister Collett Tolhurst. Huw Merriman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As it appears on the order paper, to ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer if he will make a statement on COVID-19 and the economic impact on aviation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has asked me to respond on his behalf. The COVID-19 crisis has affected every person in the country and every sector of the UK economy, and aviation is essential to that economy. It connects the regions together and it plays a huge part in the UK's future as a global trading nation. That is why the Government has responded to the crisis with an unprecedented package of measures. On the 24th of March, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, wrote to the aviation sector setting out the schemes being made available, including the deferral of VAT payments and the COVID Commercial Finance Facility and the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. The Civil Aviation Authority is also working with airlines, airports and ground handlers to provide appropriate flexibility within the regulatory framework. If airlines and airports or other aviation organisations find themselves in trouble because of coronavirus and have exhausted the measures already available to them, the Government has been clear that it is prepared to enter into discussions with individual companies seeking bespoke support. We recognise that there remain serious challenges for the aviation sector, despite the measures that have been put in place. It will take time for passenger numbers to recover, and the impact will be felt first and foremost by the sector's employees. The recent announcements about redundancies from companies such as British Airways, Virgin and EasyJet will be very distressing news for employees and their families. These are commercial decisions, and they are decisions which I regret, particularly those companies benefiting from the Job Retention Scheme. The scheme was not designed for taxpayers to fund the wages of employees, only for those companies to put the same staff on notice of redundancy during the furlough period. The Government stands ready to support anyone affected with the Department of Work and Pensions, there to help employees identify and access the support that is available. But my department has set up a Restart and Recovery and Engagement Unit to work with the aviation industry on the immediate issues affecting the restart of the sector and its longer-term growth and recovery. As part of this, we have established an Aviation Restart and Recovery Expert Steering Group. The group is formed of representatives from across the sector, including airports, airlines and ground handlers, industry bodies and unions. Mr Speaker, the sustainable recovery of the aviation sector is a core part of our commitment to global connectivity and growing the UK economy. With airports, airlines and other parts of the aviation sector, we are putting in place the building blocks for recovery. The House will be updated as soon as possible on the next steps.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for giving aviation workers in your constituency and across the nation the chance to have their voice heard. And thank you, Minister, for being a tireless champion in the sector. This is a hugely challenging time for the aviation economy. Job losses are inevitable, but many of us are concerned that companies are using this pandemic as a justification to slash jobs and employment terms. Step forward, British Airways, the only airline who is effectively sacking its entire 42,000 workforce and replacing it with 30,000 jobs on inferior terms. BA have tried this before, but its workforce resisted. It's ethically outrageous that our national flag carrier is doing this at a time when the nation is at its weakest and when we expect the country to do its bit. So can I ask the Government to use its full weight to stop unscrupulous employers from using this pandemic as a chance to slash terms and conditions? Will the Department ask the Civil Aviation Authority to undertake an urgent review into reallocating lucrative landing slots at Heathrow from companies like British Airways, who indicate they are downsizing, and perhaps hand those to those companies that wish to expand and take on workers? BA have 51% of Heathrow landing slots, including the most profitable to JFK. And will the Government change the job retention scheme to stop employers using the scheme while simultaneously putting those same employers on redundancy notice. On quarantine, Mr Speaker, this is the wrong policy at the worst possible time for the aviation sector and the economy. It gives companies like BA justification for shedding staff and worsening terms and conditions. 13 of our 15 most popular destinations internationally have a lower R rate than our own. Will the government commit to reviewing quarantine, bringing in air bridges from safer destinations and developing an immediate exit strategy to allow the aviation sector to plan ahead? Mr Speaker, the situation is grave, but there is still time to save the aviation sector with further government support and action to ensure companies like British Airways do their patriotic duty, stand by their hard-working and loyal staff rather than deserting them.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I would like to thank my honourable friend for his work as Chair of the Transport Select Committee and the fair but firm way in which he is standing up for the aviation sector. He asked about the government's ability to stop employers from making poor use of the job retention, this pandemic, in order to slash the terms and conditions. And I would like to say that I certainly would not expect employers not to use the pandemic as a chance to slash terms and conditions. As I think most people would, terms and conditions are usually a matter for employees and employers. But employees obviously have recourse to a number of the options for support in cases where this is happening. But I would like to highlight that in matters of crisis like this, you would hope that all organisations who are taking these measures with their workforce would treat their employees with the social responsibility that you would expect them to have for the workers within their organisations. And I will be doing everything I can in my power in order to make sure that that is understood by those organisations. He also asked about the ability to look at the reorganise the slots process. He's absolutely right to raise this point, and government currently is legally prevented from intervening in the slots allocation process. However, we want airport landing and take-off slots to be used as effectively as possible for UK consumers. As the UK aviation market recovers from the impacts of this terrible disease, I want to ensure the slots allocation process encourages competition and provides connectivity. So this is something that I will be looking at. I also understand that the Prime Minister has been clear, and I will be clear again today, that the job retention scheme was not designed for this purpose. It will be for Treasury to review the specifics of the scheme, and I'm sure that colleagues will be taking note of today's proceedings. The Home Secretary later will be making a statement on the quarantine measures immediately after me, and I do not want to preempt her. But I can confirm that the measures will be subject to regular review. My department, through the Aviation Restart and Recovery Unit, is working non-stop with the sector and government partners to plan for the future of aviation, enabling it to recover. No option is off the table, and we are looking very closely at air bridges, which are also known as international corridors. And just to add, Mr Speaker, I will be working tirelessly, as I have done over the last 10 weeks, to do whatever I can to mitigate the impacts that have been felt by the aviation sector.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate the Chair of the Select Committee on securing this urgent question. The aviation industry is looking to the Chancellor for leadership, but he's not here today, and they've been locked in a holding pattern once again. While the Treasury dithers and delays, the crisis continues to unfold. 12,000 job losses at BA, a quarter of its workforce, 4,500 redundancies at EasyJet, 3,000 staff at threat of redundancy at Virgin Atlantic. GE making a quarter of its global workforce redundant with jobs at risk in South Wales. Airbus describing this as the biggest crisis in their history. So where is the urgency and the clarity and the specific support package the Chancellor referred to back in March? This is a sector that contributes £22 billion a year to our economy. 230,000 jobs across the industry and the manufacturing supply chain are dependent on it. It needs to change to meet the challenge of climate change. So why did one industry leader tell the Transport Select Committee just a fortnight ago that the government was, and I quote, asleep at the wheel? Can the Minister maybe go back and wake the Treasury up? We've been calling for an aviation sector deal. Can we have one? If so, by when? British Airways has taken taxpayer cash to furlough their staff, as we've heard. Why is anyone surprised by this? We warned the government this would happen. So will the government now ensure that any bailouts come with conditions to protect jobs and workers' rights and taxpayers' money? Will the government ensure that any company in receipt of support from British taxpayers also has its tax base here in the UK? Will the government hold them to tougher environmental targets to achieve our net zero ambition, rather than simply allowing them to go bust through government inaction and incompetence? Finally, Mr Speaker, we have the Home Secretary ambling along this afternoon with a face-saving quarantine plan with huge consequences for our economy and without any publication of any evidence to support it on public health grounds. None of this is good enough. This is an issue for our whole economy. So with respect to the Minister, her department is neither use nor ornament. We need the Treasury to act. The Chancellor should be here. They should have turned up this afternoon, and I hope she'll take that message back in the strongest possible terms.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I would like to say to the honourable gentleman, well, actually, first of all, I'd like to welcome to his place because and his appointment as shadow. Obviously today I have taken the urgent question as the Minister responsible for aviation and as the Minister who has been working with the sector over the last 10 weeks in order to understand the impacts and the issues that are related to the airlines and our airports and our whole aviation sector. We cannot underestimate that the impact of coronavirus has had on the whole of the UK economy, and absolutely the aviation sector has been acutely affected by that. And we have been working hard within government, and I think that is it's pretty clear for most people to see the unprecedented level of support that the Chancellor and this government has delivered to across the economy and has had a massive impact within the aviation sector. The Chancellor was incredibly clear that any business that had explored all the government schemes and had that need for bespoke as a last resort, bespoke support, had the opportunity to enter into discussions with the government. And it is absolutely right that we would request all of those private businesses to exhaust all other options before that, including raising capital from existing investors and exhausting all the economy-wide measures that have been put. The furlough, the job retention scheme has made a massive impact in the aviation sector in order to keep those people employed. And I have already outlined in my opener to the urgent question that I will do whatever I can as aviation minister in order to encourage those companies to use the furlough, make use of those government schemes without making people redundant. We have not been asleep at the wheel. Absolutely not, and I'm not sure that's something that everybody else recognises. But a bailout by the taxpayer, of course, and any kind of government support would include obligations, making sure that it's compliant with state aid, and we meet our legal obligations, particularly with climate change. In regards to quarantine, the Prime Minister, before in PMQs, made it very, very clear we need to keep this infection under control, and therefore the Home Secretary is bringing forward measures in order to try and mitigate that.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer the House to my entry in the Members' Register. Aviation supports 1 million jobs in the UK, 114,000 in aerospace, 1,700 for my constituents. International air travel is necessary for trade. Without it, there is no global Britain. So instead of bringing in measures to close Britain off from the rest of the world, why is the government not taking a lead in developing an international aviation health screening standard to save jobs and ensure Britain is open for business?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, and I recognise the importance of the aviation sector, particularly within her constituency. And I would just like to outline that we have set up the Restart and Recovery unit within the department, which is very much working across government with the sector, with the airlines, airports and the ground handlers and our international trade bodies, and looking at how we are able to get exactly that, some international agreed standard health measures. We're working incredibly hard in order to gain consumer confidence so that people want to travel again, but also being able to get those measures in place in order that we can also absolutely meet our objective to keeping people safe and reducing the spread of coronavirus, but also trying to get the aviation sector up and running as quickly as we possibly can.
Come to Gavin Newlands, the SNP spokesperson, with 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Back in March, the Chancellor said he was working on a specific package of help for airports and airlines. We're still waiting on that support. So will she press the Chancellor to at least follow the Scottish Government's lead in giving the industry 100% business rates relief for a year? And echo what's been said by the committee chair on the despicable behaviour of Willie Walsh and IAG. In the short term, I think we all understand and accept that the industry may need to reduce in size, but the manner in which Mr Walsh is choosing to do this should be illegal if it is not already. However, this affects the supply chain too, and sadly, Rolls-Royce has today confirmed that they intend to cut 700 jobs at Shannon in my constituency. The company is looking to offshore yet more work, and despite taking UK Government R&D money along with job retention scheme money, the UK, but in particular in Shannon, is being disproportionately affected. So can I ask her, is the Government engaged with or offered any support to Rolls-Royce to mitigate job losses? And finally, Mr Speaker, will she join me in urging Rolls-Royce to engage meaningfully with the Scottish Government on supporting jobs at Shannon?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the honourable gentleman has obviously raised a number of these points with me previously, and as I've tried to articulate to him, that the support that is being offered to the aviation sector, that ability in order for them to look at and all the government schemes, exhaust all other possibilities and going to shareholders to see whether or not that they can support their businesses, and then their ability then to come to the government to have those discussions around bespoke support. And as he would imagine, those discussions are ongoing. In regards to business rates, he's mentioned this before, quite rightly. This is a matter, the Chancellor was clear about where those business rate alleviations would happen, and that is obviously a matter for the Treasury. In regards to the wider impacts in relation to the reduction in aviation and the impact that it will have on the wider jobs market within the aerospace industry, and particular impact within Rolls-Royce. As I've already outlined, the furlough scheme was not intended in order for businesses to put people on redundancy whilst they were on furlough. However, we will, of course, as you would expect, work across government and my colleagues in Bays in order to assess the significant impact that it will be felt across the economy, but particularly to the wider aerospace sector, and do whatever we can in order to make sure that we engage with those businesses to protect as many jobs as possible.
Sir Graham Brain.
Okay, can I tell the Minister that the Manchester Airport generates 100,000 jobs and is an essential motor for growth across the north of England as well? And if we're going to save those jobs, then it's essential, first of all, that companies behave responsibly, but secondly, that government should partner with the sector to make sure that the vital peak summer season goes ahead. And if that is going to happen, we need immediate clarity about the criteria for safe countries and for the names of those countries that will be the air bridges put in place rapidly.
Well, I thank my honourable friend and my right honourable friend, and he's quite right. And as aviation minister and across government, we are working with the sector at pace with officials and representatives in order to get those measures in place so people can indeed get back into the air and travel as soon as possible. However, I must caveat that with the point that ultimately the limiting the spread of coronavirus and keeping the UK population safe has got to be our priority. But I am determined and will work hard to find a solution.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. British Airways, as we've already heard, has taken public money from the government's coronavirus job retention scheme, intended to protect workers' jobs, but instead has used this to pay for 12,000 workers on their redundancy notice period. The purpose of the scheme was to keep people in work, not to let them go on the cheap. Will the Minister join me in condemning this behaviour, and will he/she ensure that any further support protects the workforce as intended? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shareholders and the employers should consider their social responsibility to the people within their business, and they should take the benefits in the good times, and they should share the burden when the times are harder, particularly when they are in receipt of taxpayer monies. Therefore, I will do, and I've already reiterated, Mr. Speaker, I will do all I can to make sure that is understood by those organisations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister will be aware of how important the airline sector is to connecting Scotland, not just with the rest of the United Kingdom, but the whole of the world. With airlines under pressure and flight paths being reduced, there is real concern in Scotland that Scotland might lose out. So can she reassure me that the Government will do everything it can do to protect Scotland's air connections, not just with the rest of the UK, but across the world?
I thank my honourable friend. He is absolutely right. Air connectivity with all of our devolved administrations, particularly Scotland, are particularly important, and very much regional connectivity, our smaller airports and those routes will feature in our planning for the recovery stage. I'm incredibly cognisant of the fact that we have got a lot of work to do in order to keep that there and deliver on our levelling up agenda, and that's exactly what I'm intending to do.
Number 8 not here, so we'll go to number 9, Dr Spencer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answers, and I echo the point around use of taxpayers' money and the furlough scheme and corporate responsibility for carriers such as British Airways. A 14-day quarantine will ground the aviation industry and all the jobs and businesses that rely on it, and as yet we have not provided aviation-specific financial support. But given that the 14-day quarantine is in effect a government-mandated shutdown of a large part of the passenger airline industry, would the Minister agree with me that sector-specific financial support should be provided, as we have with other sectors directly shut down, such as shops and pubs?
Well, again, I thank my honourable friend, and I do recognise the importance of the aviation sector within his constituency, and I know he's been a champion and spoken to me a number of times on this issue already. Absolutely, we have delivered unprecedented financial support already for these airlines, but with the ability to access those government schemes. As we move through the period of restart and recovery, we are working with the industry in order to assess what the problems and the issues and the requirements will be. And we haven't taken anything off the table, but we will continue to work through that. And obviously, we are working very closely with the sector in order to deliver the quarantine announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is probably worth repeating. British Airways, which has benefited from COVID-19 taxpayer support, has issued redundancy notices to its entire 42,000 strong workforce, and shamelessly intends to make 12,000 redundant and rehire the remainder on much worse contracts. So British Airways has taken hundreds of millions of pounds of government money intended to protect workers' jobs. In the words of the many British Airways employees in my Leicester East constituency, who are fearing for their futures, this is immoral, opportunistic and greedy. Did the government not agree conditions? Does the government plan to stand up to this corporate bully? And will they say now, how will they guarantee protections for workers?
I feel the concerns of BA workers and others, and I want to make the point that the government schemes, we want to make the point to these organisations that the use of government schemes is preferable to making redundancies. Terms and conditions are a matter for negotiation between employers and employees, and government's not part of that. But I have already stated that we would expect employers to treat employees fairly and in the spirit of partnership.
Ruth Capron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Up to 1 in 3 households in the Hounslow Borough could be affected by job losses at Heathrow. So, will the government work with aviation communities and their councils, and also with aviation unions, to deal with the economic and the social impact of the decimation of the aviation sector on our communities?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that point, because it's quite right, and we, Department of Work and Pensions, stand ready to support anyone that is affected with those announcements and those job losses. And I myself, as the aviation sector has, a minister, has said that I am quite keen to work where we can, regionally, where there are particular areas that may or may not be affected disproportionately by the loss of these jobs.
Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without airports, there can be no aviation sector, and many of our smaller regional airports, like Cornwall Airport, Newquay, have been very deeply impacted by this crisis, and there's great concern about their future. These airports are going to be vital in the recovery of the aviation sector and indeed the wider economy. So can the Minister say what steps she's taking to support our regional airports?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's quite right. The regional airports, our smaller airports throughout the UK, will and have been affected by coronavirus. I have given my assurances to those smaller airports that we will work with them on the recovery stage in order to secure our connectivity. They are important pieces of infrastructure, and I am very cognizant of the fact that once those important pieces of infrastructure are closed or lost, it's harder to reinvigorate them. So I'll be working my hardest to try and protect that.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My many constituents who are employed by British Airways are absolutely devastated by the threat of losing their jobs and the proposed downgrading of their terms and conditions of employment. And this is a message that BA needs to hear loud and clear from this House, I think. So I'm glad to hear that she shares the concern of so many members of these proposals, but will she go further and now condemn this behaviour and make it a condition of any financial or business support that they reverse this decision?
I've been clear to the Honourable Lady on my position on that particular point, but I think we also do need to recognise that coronavirus has had an unprecedented impact on all businesses, and airlines are not immune from some of the financial challenges that other parts of the economy are faced with. However, we absolutely stand by the point that this was not the intention of the Jobs Retention Scheme, and I think I've already made the point.
Morrisey.
Does my right honourable friend agree that if British Airways want to continue to treat their employees with contempt by refusing to take Section 188 off the table and refusing to move the deadline past June 15th, will the government consider speaking to the Aviation Authority to encourage them to remove their legacy slots, their legacy landing slots, as leverage for making sure that they treat their employees with the respect they deserve?
I agree with my honourable friend that, and as I've already outlined, in the good times, businesses get the benefits from being shareholders. And actually, they should be spreading that burden in the bad times. And ultimately, it is workers that make any business and really dictate the success of any of those businesses. I've already outlined that there are opportunities moving forward as we work through coronavirus and move to the end of December, and I'm quite willing to look at anything that can benefit and open up and increase the competition within our aviation sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In her response to the honourable member for Leicester East, the Minister said that she wanted to make the point to BA that the job retention scheme was not to be used for redundancies. Can I ask her to confirm specifically what engagement has the government had with British Airways? It's at least 3 weeks since I was first contacted by constituents who are appalled by the way they are being treated after a lifetime of loyal service. What has the government actually done to date to engage with BA on this point?
Well, the honourable lady will accept that I've been engaging regularly throughout the last 10 weeks with the whole of the aviation sector, and also BA as an organisation and other organisations that have had made similar announcements. I will continue to do that, and I'd just like to highlight that debates like this will make the point very clearly as well to those organisations. And as I've said before, organisations taking these decisions ultimately need customers, and if customers view that their actions are below par, then actually people, when booking flights, may be thinking with their feet.
Mr. Wakefield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start by thanking the honourable member for Bexhill and Battle for securing this urgent question. As an MP for Greater Manchester, I'm particularly concerned about Manchester Airport and the wider impact on the North West aerospace and aviation industry. Can my honourable friend advise what assessment has been done by herself and her department on the employment sectors for the sector itself and the wider supply chain?
Well, I thank my honourable friend and note the importance of Manchester Airport close to his constituency and the work that they do there. And we've been engaging with them extensively over the last 10 weeks. As you would expect, we are working across government through a government-led task force in regards to aviation, working with my colleagues in BAYS, looking at the extent of the impact on jobs and the sector from the wider, wider than just airlines and airports, and that work is ongoing and obviously will be very much influencing policy.
We now come to Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liverpool John Lennon Airport in my constituency supports 7,000 jobs, contributes £240 million in gross value added to the local economy, but saw no international flights at all from mid-April to mid-May. The chaotic and strangely timed government quarantine plan will prevent any early recovery and cost the aviation industry generally even more. In view of this, what specific support will she offer to the aviation industry generally and to regional airports in particular in exchange for this sudden imposition of a government policy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our priority is clear. It has been to halt and limit the spread of the coronavirus. I am working with our officials, our department are working with the sector in order to gain a set of standard health measures that can be applied across the industry, which will be internationally recognised. We are working with the sector in order to find ways in which we can allow people to travel safely and come into the country without the need for quarantine. But ultimately, it is absolutely the right time to implement quarantining, as we are seeing a reduced number of transmission, and we want to protect the UK and the people within it.
William Marson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Hertford and Stortford, who are employed by British Airways at Stansted Airport, are desperately worried for their jobs. will my right honourable friend join me in supporting them, condemning BA, urging BA, a profitable, cash-rich company who has availed themselves of government support in this crisis and in the context of Project Birch, to engage with the government, unions and staff and not to destroy my constituents' jobs.
I thank my honourable friend, and like her, I too have British Airways employees within my constituency, and I understand the pain and the worry that it is causing those individuals. There is so much concern amongst the whole of the UK population and what that means for them economically. I've made the point that this is not what we would expect. But quite right, we are not part of those discussions that are ongoing, but I will monitor them. I will continue to talk to unions. I will continue to talk to those businesses in order to limit the number of jobs that are lost.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've had scores of emails from people representing years and years of loyal service to British Airways, who initially welcomed these lefty-looking furlough and job retention schemes and are now finding that the public purse is being used to effectively chuck them on the scrap heap. So, can I ask the Minister to revive another old Labour tradition and, rather than acting a bit like a bystander, to bang some heads together and get unions, airlines and the government round the table? They can have beer and sandwiches at number 10 if they like, and thrash out a sector-specific deal to save aviation in this country.
Minister.
Well, I like the honourable lady's optimism for beer and sandwiches. I don't drink beer personally, so it wouldn't necessarily be a benefit for me. Wine is more my taste, but I should say that we remain committed as government in order to do what we need to do and align the policies in order to get people up, planes up in the air. Aviation sector is so important for the UK economy. It will remain important for the UK economy, particularly with our regional connectivity, and we will work through this crisis with the mind of the aviation sector and what we can do and how we can mitigate the impact of that.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister if she'll continue to press the Home Office on introducing a flexible quarantine rather than a blanket quarantine, so that countries with high infection rates can be targeted rather than every country, including those with low infection rates? And while she has the opportunity, given that some extensions have been given to review periods, could she give a commitment to the House today that any review post 8th of June, 29th of June, will be 3 weeks and 3 weeks only, and not expanded or extended to a 4-week period or further?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's right that any quarantine review period needs to be understood by the sector. As I have already outlined, we are working with the sector in order to, and we are investigating at air bridges. There's a lot of work going on internationally as well with our international organisations, quite rightly, because this is not something that just purely affects the UK. In relation to quarantine, there are a number of countries that are following suit and or have already implemented measures of this time. The Home Secretary will be immediately after me making a statement in relation to the policy, and obviously I won't want to preempt anything that she might say.
Much, Mr. Speaker. It's quite clear from the kind of callous and cavalier attitude of Willie Walsh that he only understands one piece of language. So can I gently suggest to the Minister this definitely needs to be escalated? When will the Prime Minister be picking up the phone to Willie Walsh and making crystal clear to BA that unless they halt these plans, those much coveted slots at Heathrow will go? We need much stronger language from the government on this, because many of my constituents, frankly, are cheesed off by this.
Well, I accept that constituents will be concerned and upset. That's absolutely a completely understandable position. I've already tried to outline that I will do what I can in my capacity as Aviation Minister to mitigate or limit the number of job losses. We haven't stopped working. I haven't stopped working on that. The Prime Minister also was clear that this was not in the spirit of the furlough scheme, and we will keep working on that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The slowdown in the aviation sector is having a big impact on jobs in my own constituency. Airbus, Rolls-Royce and GKN employ several thousand people. So does my honourable friend agree that we must get the aviation sector working again quickly, not only to protect jobs, but to preserve our country's world-leading industrial manufacturing capability in civil aerospace and, crucially, in defence?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. The success of the aviation industry has a direct impact on some of the wider aviation manufacturing technology that is being developed in this country, and particularly it is affecting my constituency also. So he's absolutely right, and we will continue to work across government in order to understand the full impact that it has in the wider supply chain and work in ways to mitigate that as far as we are able.
Mr Speaker, Asda, Marks and Spencer's, B&Q, John Lewis, Sainsbury's. The Minister and I have been here before. Employers choosing to reduce terms and conditions on its long-standing staff simply with 90 days' notice. Only BA is the employer that bears our country's name and holds our country's flag. Is this what we want for Britain in post-coronavirus times? We will not fight our way out of a depression by reducing people's pay.
The honourable lady is quite right. We have indeed had conversations in this vein many times before, and as I said in my opener, I regret the job announcements that the organisations have made. I think that we also need to accept that we are in unprecedented times, and we are working hard with the sector, with all stakeholders, and that's including unions and industry representatives and companies specifically, in order to fully understand what that will mean for the future and what we need to do in order to mitigate that. I've said a number of times today that on my position, and I will continue to work in order to try and limit those job losses.
Benson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Although the aviation industry will face significant challenges in the months and years ahead, regional airports across the UK will continue to be well placed to increase economic growth and boost connectivity in the longer term. Does my honourable friend agree with me that restoring commercial passenger flights from Blackpool Airport in the longer term could boost tourism, increase economic growth and really help to deliver the government's levelling up agenda?
My honourable friends are absolutely right. Regional airports can have such a major impact on the local communities in which they serve, and very much there is a pride in having an airport within your area, and they are absolutely part of our levelling up agenda and being able to increase and improve our UK's connectivity, not just within the UK but abroad, and absolutely that is part of our recovery and planning for the future.
McKinnell.
Speaker, and I echo concerns about the shoddy treatment of BA staff. Newcastle Airport's the single largest site employment in my constituency, supporting 4,000 jobs, 19,000 across the North East region. It's pivotal to our regional economy. Airports in Scotland and Northern Ireland have been granted business rates relief. In England and Wales, the government has offered that to retail, hospitality and leisure, but not aviation. She says business rates are not her department, but the Chancellor is not here. So can this government not see that this industry needs support now, but also for the future economic storms that are clearly going to come, that are going to impact areas, particularly like the North East?
I understand the impact that any reduction in jobs or the stress of organisations with her constituency will have on her constituency. We have the Chancellor did announce an unprecedented level of support. That has been made use of. The option to come to us to talk to us about bespoke support has been there and is still there, and I'm continuing to talk to airports and airlines about the ability to tap into that. And we will continue to work with the sector in order to mitigate some of the issues and the impacts that they are quite understandably feeling at this moment in time.
27 withdrawn. We go to Zarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr
Speaker, constituents of mine in Coventry South have told me that BA's plan means that they face redundancy, significantly reduced wages and worse working conditions. The company should step back from the brink and instead work with trade unions and the government to develop a strategy that protects jobs and the environment. So will the Minister commit to using the government's powers to prevent this betrayal of staff, such as withdrawing slots at airports and exploring the option to bring back the company under public control?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I've outlined the point quite clearly. I've answered a number of questions in the same vein, and that is I will continue to do what I can in order to make organisations within the sector aware that we would rather than use the unprecedented government support that is available to them before making redundancies. I absolutely understand the concerns of the workers that are affected, and we will continue to look at all options that we have as a government to make use of.
Chris Grayling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also represent a number of the British Airways employees affected, and I'm grateful to the Minister for her commitment to keep pressurising the airline to try to minimise the number of job cuts. And indeed, I'd encourage her to do that not simply for British Airways, but all the other airlines affected. But, Mr. Speaker, this sector is the busiest and biggest of its kind in Europe in normal times. It's crucial to our economy. Can I ask her to work with the Chancellor as he comes to his next financial statement during the course of this year to look at a longer-term recovery plan for the sector that goes beyond the immediate government support and actually sets a path that can put this sector back where it should be, which is at the top of the European League table?
Minister.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, and he is absolutely right in the scale and the importance of the aviation sector in the UK compared to other parts of the world, and also the level of employment that creates within the UK. And I am committed, as the Secretary of State is, working with Treasury in order to, and across government, with all government departments, in order to find solutions to a sector which has been and has been affected badly, and obviously will maybe experience a slight lag in regards to the restart, just due to the nature of the work that they do. So I am committed to working with my colleagues across government to find solutions to those questions.
Number 30 not here. We'll go to Flick Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my honourable friend for her comments, particularly of BA, which is affecting a lot of my employees as well. Now, Southampton Airport is an important contributor to the economic prosperity of the wider region and has already seen the loss of Flybe, which was 95% of its business, so it's already struggling before COVID-19. What further steps can the government give to regional airports like Southampton, which are relied on by a wide range of companies, and it's a lifeline for business and other travel?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I know very well the impact of the coronavirus has on Southampton Airport, and they are a great asset on the south coast. We are engaged constantly with the airports, and I'm committed to doing that and having those conversations on what we can do to help those regional airports, and that will continue, so we fully understand their pressures, and where we can act, I will do my best to achieve that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 12th of May, I raised the worries of many of my constituents, some of whom had over 30 years of service with the Transport Secretary. One constituent highlighted to me that on his road alone there are 5 BA members of staff. And let's be clear, these are staff members who've given up birthdays, funerals to serve BA. They've made sacrifices. They fear losing everything when the sham of a consultation ends in 2 weeks. So will the government act urgently now to ensure supports are provided to those constituents and others?
I thank the Honourable Lady, the Department of Work and Pensions are ready to stand ready to help and support anyone who's affected by this. I have to reiterate that terms and conditions are for negotiation between the employer, employee and/or their representatives, and government aren't part of those discussions. If terms are not agreed to, there is still a matter. There are still options for recourse. I am monitoring the situation closely. I think there's many constituencies affected. We will keep an eye on what happens in relation to that particular point that she raises. But absolutely, I want all employees to be treated fairly and given the respect that they deserve for the contribution they've made for the businesses in which they've worked.
Jameson.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to the Minister for confirming that the Government would be willing to enter into bespoke agreements and arrangements with airlines. Given that British Airways in particular is ultimately a private company and thinks it can behave as disgracefully as it wants to, how does the Government intend to mitigate that?
Well, as I have said, I, as the Aviation Minister, absolutely would expect that any organisation would be treating their employees fairly in the spirit of partnership, and absolutely it is a question for the organisations as to whether they feel that they're carrying out their social responsibility and acting in a good way. But absolutely, there are opportunities for us as we move forward. We have the Restart and Recovery project where we are working with the sector to find ways in which we can speed up the recovery within the aviation sector, and I'm sure that Treasury and across government we are looking at ways in which we can mitigate all of these things that colleagues quite rightly have raised here this morning.
We're a House.
Mr Speaker, now is the opportunity to move the aviation sector towards net zero. Government needs to require the gradual blending in of synthetic fuels, first for all international flights, for all internal flights, and then international flights via international agreements. There is a mechanism for doing this via the renewable transport fuel obligation. Will she commit towards this move towards a net zero aviation industry?
The Honourable Lady knows that obviously decarbonisation with the aviation sector is a very important priority for government and also the sector themselves. They've come together to work towards that, and I will commit as the Aviation Minister and the Department to working with the sector in order to reduce those emissions and decarbonise the industry as far as we're able.
In Paisley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I put on record a thanks to the Minister for the several meetings she's had with myself and colleagues over this crisis to deal with the airport situation in Northern Ireland, which has its own particular problems. I'm sure she agrees that the staff of British Airways who operate out of Northern Ireland, cabin crew, pilots and other staff, feel absolutely betrayed by the conduct of Willie Walsh and the organisation. They carry the strapline national carrier. It should be changed to national disgrace by the way they have operated. But the government can't have it both ways. The government can't close air traffic down, introduce a quarantine that will impact on airports and airlines, and then say this has nothing to do with us. Action has got to be taken to address this holistically, and I urge the Minister and the government to act.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his words, and particularly in regards to our regional connectivity and being able to continue that connectivity with Northern Ireland is a key priority, and it's been good to be able to continue to do that with government support. And we will continue, as I've outlined, to work together across government with the Aviation Task Force, working with sector, working with experts, working with our stakeholders in order to try and find solutions. The reality of it is there are, with regards to aviation, there has to be consumer confidence as well to travel, and we need to make sure that we are tackling consumer confidence but also creating the right environment with our policies in order for airlines to get back in the air, and I'm committed to working with all our colleagues across government as the Secretary of State is in order to deliver that.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 188 of the Trade Union and Labour Relations Act does not just create a general duty to consult with employees, but a specific duty to consult on avoiding redundancies, reducing the numbers of those selected for redundancy and mitigating the consequences. Could my honourable friend commit to including an employment judge or an impartial employment lawyer onto the steering group to assess whether BA and other airlines are meaningfully engaging with their statutory obligations and make this a condition of further government support?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. She makes a very good suggestion, and I happily take that away and see what I can do.
Sam Terry.
Thank you, Mr. I've had thousands of individually written emails, including residents in Ilford South who have collectively spent decades and decades working for British Airways. Unite the union members that have given their adult lives in making British Airways our proud national flag carrier. BA is a multi-billion-pound company, one that has £10.7 billion in liquid assets and other assets if you include its parent company IAG. I would ask the Minister to seriously consider whether or not any mechanism can be brought forward by the government to look at the allocation of the slots, because without those slots, the most lucrative part of all of the operation with which BA makes its profits, IAG, Willie Walsh and all of the people swinging the axe on all those tens of thousands of people. Remember, not only being sacked, all of them being sacked and then re-engaged, it might make them sit up and actually listen to how serious members are across this House, and if not, ask if they will return the British flag, because they don't deserve to carry it on their planes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to thank the honourable gentleman for obviously his questioning of me on this particular point at the Transport Select Committee, and recognise supporting very much his constituents. And the points that I will make is that this has been a commercial decision taken by British Airways. We would absolutely expect any organisation entering into this process that it would be done with fairness, in the right way for employees, and I will do my best to work with colleagues across the government in order to deliver the support that is needed for those people affected, and also to try our best to mitigate any particular job losses which are coming because of an unprecedented reduction of the number of flights travelling, and it's not something that is specific to the UK.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Murray is well served by Inverness Airport, and it has been operating with only essential flights during this pandemic. Can the Minister outline what support the Government have given and will continue to give to regional airports such as Inverness, who serve people in Murray and across the north of Scotland?
Well, thank my honourable friend. We will continue to work with our regional airports in order to understand the full impact that coronavirus is having on the operations of their businesses. As I've already outlined, regional connectivity is a priority for us within the department, and I will continue to work with those individual regional airports in order to deliver on what we can do. There are policy levers that are available to us, and we will be exploring that more within the Restart and Recovery Unit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I raise the particular issue with the Minister of the British Airways avionics engineering site in Llantriston to my honourable friend's constituency of Pontypridd, and I pay tribute to her for all the work she's doing in supporting the workforce there. Many of my constituents are facing this consultation now. It cannot be good enough for the Minister to simply say the DWP is ready to offer support if they lose their jobs. These are highly skilled, well-paid jobs in South Wales. It is worth £1 billion to the South Wales economy and more than £6 billion to the Welsh economy as a whole. I say to the Minister, and I don't doubt his sincerity, but her answers just aren't good enough. My constituents and constituents up and down the land are desperate for government intervention to support the aviation sector and all these jobs that many tens of thousands of constituents rely on.
Well, whilst the honourable gentleman knows I have great respect for him, but I will come back to him on the fact we are supporting the aviation sector. We have delivered unprecedented government support. Those those organisations have the opportunity to support with us from a bespoke support. But he's absolutely right. You know, in regards to what we absolutely as government will try and deliver what we can in order to support those colleagues. But we also need to be asking those organisations how they will support those workers that are being affected by the commercial decisions that they are taking, and I will continue to do what I can in my capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think much of the anger that's been expressed in this House during this debate has been because British Airways has taken advantage of a government scheme intended to protect jobs and used it as a convenient funding stream for a long-planned corporate restructuring. It's a breach of faith. Does my honourable friend agree that British Airways should pay a price for that breach of faith?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents have had to make huge sacrifices during this terrible outbreak, and they have responded with real solidarity, helping others and following the rules. Now those who work at the British Airways call centre in Newcastle see the contempt in which they are held, and they feel abandoned, betrayed, blackmailed. Does the Minister agree that, just as with governments, businesses will be judged by their response to a crisis? And does she think British Airways' response is worthy of our national flag?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady is right. Businesses are judged in the way they behave and the way they treat their employees, and